Today, we are welcoming you in the National Museum of Art of Ukraine, National Art Museum of Ukraine, this day will be kind of more an introductory thing. The first part, we're gonna have small intro about Kyiv case, about the 80s, about the 90s, and a little bit also about the 2010s. Afterwards, we're going to have an excursion, so we will have a long walk in the city and a little bit of public transport feeling. And then we come back and we will have a panel discussion with architects who've been working at that time and who are working now. Going to have this opportunity or a chance to translate the issues of 80s into the issues of today. And at the end of the day, we're going to have a lecture by Lukasz Stanek on his recent research based over and beyond the research he did in his book. And this is the structure of this day. And so maybe is translation good for if somebody's hearing Ukrainian? I hope so. Yes, and so first of all, I think I want to welcome Oksana Barshynova, who is a deputy director of the museum, and she's gonna start the introduction, and also Eglė Juocevičiūtė, I'm right in pronouncing. She is a chief curator at the National Museum of Art of Lithuania, if I'm not wrong in the name, I hope. She will also, you can also join us at the table if you want. Yeah, I think it's better to sit now. So this is how it started.
Доброго дня.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the National Art Museum of Ukraine, I'm happy to welcome you here. We are very grateful for all the support you provide us with, for the interest, for your being here. For the National Museum of Art of Ukraine, the project After Socialist Modernism is of exceptional significance, since for several years already the museum has been working on the development of interdisciplinary platforms for the research of the period we are going to discuss today. Our goal is to return in the history books objects, themes, and notions which have been artificially taken away. Our today goal is even more voluminous, because we need to discuss all the existing problems and bring together various solutions in order to improve the state of play in the area. We are talking in the first place about the epoch of 1980s, so-called postmodernism, where Soviet architecture was combining both some internal trends and international achievements. Today we are going to talk about the architecture of 1980s, but also of the transition period between 1980s and 90s. So we are talking today about the development of a wider context, not only interdisciplinary context, but also socio-geographical context. That is why we engage international partners and international colleagues. So today we are raising the issue of value and significance of the architecture of that time and looking for solutions to avoid. Our attention is turning architectural objects into museum objects because here in Ukraine we do not have a specialized museum for architectural objects. This is why the archives of former design bureaus, design companies are at the risk of loss, and only private organizations and associations are making efforts to collect and preserve them. So all these meticulations made the museum to make a decision to organize such a project. But of course, we could not make it without cooperation and support with other partners such as NGO Understand Soviet Podil in the face of go.oleksandr.anisimov and other partners. So what we are trying to do now is to switch public discussion into a more scientific direction. We are grateful to all the co-organizers, to Mix Magazine, to the Center of Urban Studies, to our Lithuanian colleagues, including Lithuanian Museum of Arts. I'm sure that in Lithuania our partners face the same problems, but have already made some progress. We're also very grateful to the House of Europe for all the support they provided us with. Thank you.
It's very nice to be here, and thank you very much for an invitation. It's a pleasure to be part of this project. Yes, I'm representing the Lithuanian National Museum of Art. I'm a curator in the National Gallery of Art, which is a venue of the museum. And as Oksana said, that there's no museum of architecture in here. This is also the case in Lithuania. The Museum of Architecture was closed in 2004. In Lithuania, and National Gallery of Art, after opening in 2009, take upon this task to rethink questions of modern and postmodern architecture through exhibition and through talks. It's very interesting to have this opportunity to compare. It's my 5th or 6th time here in Kyiv. I'm an avid admirer of your history and of the processes that's happening right now. And every time I come here, I understand more and more about our case. Of course, the scales are completely different, but that's also an interesting thing to understand, how scale changes things, even though the ideology and the political processes are more or less the same. So hopefully I will get a lot of ideas and a lot of good experiences here today and tomorrow, and we'll be able to translate the knowledge and the approach in the events that we organize in the museum when I come back in November. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we're gonna start with the introduction on Kyiv. So there will be a small part at the end when my colleague Borys, I don't see him, but he's somewhere here. He will present our research development, like in process. So what we're doing now, because this project is more than a conference, of course. So we have this public program going on after the conference where we're gonna take on issues of contemporary development, on the discussions about history in the city, and also on the archiving architecture and so on. And it will all end with the publication with your papers and our introductory papers. and also a small part of the research that is going to be on the website you visited as a conference. It's going to be there, and at the end, Borys will show how it works. But it's going to start with what do I feel it's important to know about Kyiv, and how can we look at Kyiv from the perspective of this after socialist modernism thing. It's not, the clicker is not working. Get back. Yeah. So I'm gonna try to use 4 topics or 4 periods. They are a bit intersected, but they are still something I want to try on and maybe develop into some more discussions tomorrow, and in the excursion that we're gonna have later. So the first thing is like how it all kind of started, or kind of how it came to be as this complicated nature of postmodernism in the Soviet era. So in Kyiv, I'm gonna present one case, which is in the map of the city. It's important map, you know. I took it from the general plan of 1986, and this plan was. This thing is not working the way I expected, but anyway. So this area is this is the city center. So this area, which I'm going to talk about, is kind of close to the city center, but it's not the city center itself. And this plan was the thing of the same era or the same age as this development. So they were going to develop this large late Soviet micro-districts all over the city, which actually happened, but actually 90s in their form. And this case is called Horkoho-Bezhenka competition. It was a competition held in 1972, and it was kind of the first competition where this classical Soviet microrayon approach was contested in Kyiv. And the main thing was here that here you can see this classical European blocks that kind of evolve into a very modernistic area of very specific quality. And the idea of the Kyiv project architects who won the competition was not to develop a microrayon actually, but to kind of try to work with this structure of blocks, but in a very specific way. They were trying to make the blocks work for these structures. They were called Жилой complex, or the living structure, I will show later. And they were trying to develop the whole comprehensive area of this part, which is called, basically, this is Horkoho, and this is Bezhenka streets, which had to have a lot of more infrastructure, like concert halls, schools, movie theaters, a market, and a lot of infrastructure that was going to work together with this living district. And this form, it has evolved by 1983. It has evolved in a very concrete project that they started to build actually. So it took 10 years. Because of the unconventionality of the ideas, of the logic. It took 10 years for them to get to the kind of the latest stage of design. And in this design, it's visible that there is, of course, insertions of these modernistic structures that are some kind of a bit different from the old structure of the city, but they are already seen as a part of the system. So they are not something that develops from point zero or neglects what's there, but it kind of inserts itself in the living structure of the city and tries to bring new functions, new scale, new logic of this spatial arrangement. Because here is the main railway in Kyiv, which goes to Moscow. And this project was intended to be kind of a new skyline of the city. So people arriving to Moscow, going to Moscow, arriving from Moscow, they had to have this skyline all over from their view from the train. And these structures at the later stage, they got this outlook, which is kind of very specific, because there is, of course, this typification and standardization here. We can obviously feel that this is something still modernistic, but the way the structure was working is a bit different, because for one thing, it's already completely free scale in the sense of the heights. It was Specifically for each building, they developed the height system, which could help these buildings to look good from every angle going around, and also from the highway and from the railway. So they were kind of designing all over out view on these buildings and designing the interior spaces at the same time. I feel this being a very hard challenge. And this structure is still modernist in a sense that is completely permeable. So there are pathways, every structure. This is one in the 22nd district, so the one here. Every building has at least 3 or maybe even 4 entrances to the courtyard. And if you look at the way it looked from the above, you see the building is not the one monolithic structure, but it also inserts kindergarten, which is a part of this old living block, which kind of suits the place very, very, very specifically for this place. It's not a random kindergarten, because the other one, you don't see the other one, but nevertheless. And you see that there's permeability. So the whole structure is kind of, it's a pathway, it's a system of pathways, a courtyard, their own courtyard, which is also important because generally in microrayons, the courtyards were still a kind of a place between freestanding buildings. And these courtyards were also developed in different heights because they wanted to bring back the idea of landscape. And the building is not flat as it seems from here, because this is the street structure, but the inside, it has 3 levels. There is 1 level for the courtyard, 1 level for the entrance for the building itself, and the 3rd level, which is a kind of a playground above the heating facility. So this was kind of an integrated courtyard that could bring different functions here, and also be kind of a place of meeting of people and just an everyday place as well. So it was not that much over complicated. And the new structures, which also you can see somewhere here, which were a bit later ideas, these were, of course, not suited that much for Soviet economy. So this kind of a supermarket, a lot of goods, or shopping malls, or things like that. Yeah, they could be possible in the well, maybe, I don't know, Czechoslovakia maybe, but in Soviet Union there was no economy to support this. So these projects took, I think, they were latest to develop and they took really long to get working. The other thing was this super interesting project of a school, which never got built because the state never gave funds for it. But this would be kind of a cultural center and the school together, which would be also, I would say, an unusual mix for Soviet time. But going on from this project, the team of these architects, they got involved into the second project, which I'm gonna tell a bit later. So this is the interesting story. This is basically the same people who I will be talking about along this lecture or presentation. These are the same people who kind of got involved from this project on and got to a very, very postmodernist stage. This is how it looked back in 90s, late 80s. So this is unfortunately the best image of this courtyard we could get. So you see these different levels interacting. They're kind of pathways and also the space, but it's already parked. So you see that the facilities for parking were kind of never developed. They were planned, of course, but never developed. And this very, you know, like from the viewpoint of a car driver, it's kind of a strong image. But also from a pedestrian scale, after trees grow today, it's also kind of very, very humane. The second thing is kind of, before we get to any of these kind of very 80s things, there was something else happening in the 70s, which I call construction of history or reconstruction of history or reinvention of history. So the other place I'm going to talk about, so we were here before, we jump a bit further north to the Podil district, and in the Podil district, another thing was happening. So they got this very, very modernist plan of demolishing everything and building it with the freestanding, partially enclosed courtyards and bringing a lot of greenery in the space. So the whole district was going to be demolished and built anew. Except for a few main, how they call them, monuments. So the key monuments that were the Kontraktowy Dім, the building of the academy, the church, a few churches maybe, and basically one street that was left out of the old structure. And the thing that this was the first project, the first plan in Kyiv that found some resistance. So before the Soviet economy and kind of the ideas of planners, they were just discussed in the halls of or Держbud and then accepted and then built up as the economy could. But this thing somehow got into public attention, and the newly founded institution. So yeah, this is a very nice thing. I think this is really cool. So the old skyline was this old shattered structures and so on, and they really wanted to build it anew. You see, there is some kind of iconic buildings remaining, but the scale changes completely, and the whole outline of the district changes. And there was a quote I found in the 1991. How did we actually survive this plan? How did we make it not happen? And they were discussing that the ideas that people presented while talking about the plan in 1968 was that they felt like this all should be gone. This should be gone because it's tasteless, it's too dense, it's not sanitary, it's not relevant for our time, and it's also, this complete overall was kind of based on this attitude towards the past, a very different one than we'll see in a few slides. Another project that was happening in parallel, which is important to understand, is the Park Museum of Ancient Kyiv. So it's very hard to locate it because it's never happened in this way. So it's hard to locate it, but Kyiv is a very hilly city. And one of the most important and iconic and symbolic places is the Pejzažna alėja. So from Lvivska Square, there is an alley or a passway or, as Kevin Lynch would say, a path or something that leads to the oldest part of the city, Kyiv Detinets, where the 10th century church was constructed, the first one. And the idea of the architects was to build this to accentuate the landscape, to build over the landscape, to bring new highlights. This was going to be to a museum of archaeology, and to bring this new, fantastically modern attitude to this area, which was neglected and completely run down. But this project, you see, it took like ages, and it never happened in the way it was intended to. But the important thing, going back to this project, is that the area where it started was just here. So it's maybe 500 meters from this space, and they coincided in space and in time. And this criticism of the first project, which was, you don't need to demolish everything, we can save something. There are more important buildings, and this living structure of the city is also important, and the streets and the view and the feeling of Podil was going to be lost, and everything. And there was a third coincidence happening there. It's still not enough, so there was a metro being constructed. And this was the first time when Soviets started to really think about history, because they had to choose how to build metro. And because of the high waters, they had to build it in an open structural way, and they saved the street. So basically, they could have widened it to build it more efficiently, faster, etc., but they saved the street. We're gonna walk there today. And they saved the street, and then they found out that there is something like 12 centuries of history beneath. Before there weren't any suggestions of how old is Kyiv, actually, like what remains of what, beyond the church remains, there was nothing, and this was the real economic heart of the city. They found it when digging the metro. And after that, this project, which I was talking about, the project of Avram Miletsky and his team, the skyline, new skyline, and the old part, was kind of extended towards the old city. So they encompassed the whole area of this higher part of the city with this monumental new modernist structures, which gonna encompass the hills, and also to join it with the archaeology. So he wanted to make it a whole comprehensive museum, open museum for people in the city. So how our city functioned back then, so you could walk from the up to down and feel all these layers of history, and also backwards. And all of these things, these discussions about findings of history, of these layers of different archaeological remains, they all came to the thing that we actually don't need to demolish it. We actually can think of it in a different way. And one of the important outcomes of this was the very comprehensive redevelopment idea of the old district of Honchariko-Zhemyaki, today's Vozdvizhenka, in 1980s, to make it a kind of a thing from the past, but working in the today's structure of the city. Because it's just a small part of the city, you could make it kind of a living museum, as something, a space which could invite tourists, bring more knowledge about the Kyiv past, etc., and also employ some people, because it would be kind of something of post-industrial economy, going back to industrial economy a bit, you know, workshops, things like crafting, etc. And in fact, in 1974, because of this growing resistance, because of these competing ideas of how the city should look like, the Kyiv project, the main design institute, they rethought the plan. They started to think of it, okay, we're gonna really think about the city or this part of the city as something we should preserve, but maybe update or upgrade. And you see, so in 1974, they wanted to rebuild a church. In 1974. When I found it out, I was some kind of a bit confused. I didn't know how did they manage to do it. So, but this was the plan of reconstruction, and they wanted to reconstruct the old Bratsky monastery that was, it was like 40 years ago it was demolished. So it was after 40 years they already wanted to build it back, and yeah, and kind of preserve the old structure. So you see this kind of already a little bit of postmodern, or I don't know, like this feeling of different streets than modernist ideas. And all they came back already in 1974. And these plans developed in a few years. So imagine that project on the hills. So the museum had to be held somewhere here, this underground museum, and the pathway from Andriivsky Uзвis was going upstairs to that place. And together, these were two main projects that kind of gave a halt to this modernist build over of the district. And finally, at the end point in 1983, they accepted the comprehensive conservation area plan, which kind of completely, it said a complete stop to any redevelopment in the central area, so it was illegal to build anything there. And then this area got into this very highly observed or controlled development area. And we're going to talk about projects now that happened in this part. So they were a bit marginal, but still in this historical area. And this construction of history that I call it, it's also interesting because of this regulation. They also had to develop new types of social infrastructure. Yes. This one. So this was, and this one. Yes, the difference. So, it was conceived, so this was the main historical area where everything should be super regulated, and this was just a historical area that we wanted to preserve as a heritage of the city. There was no precise control except for the height on the redevelopment of the places, and you see the specific buildings that were marked as the monuments, or buildings should be monuments in nearest future, should become monuments. Yeah, and then they had to develop, you see already on this plan, a few of those, these small buildings here, one here and one here. These were kindergartens developed specifically for this area. So to fit this old block structure, to insert new social infrastructure, not destroying the neighborhood, not destroying the block, but to fit it in, they developed a structure for this was the main area for playing and kids, but the kitchen area was flexible. You could develop it for each specific block, specific kitchen area, which could give an opportunity for architects to develop, to use both this model, standardized design, and also insert their own vision and contextualize the project. They got built, a few of them, two actually, and one in the previous project I told you. This got built and they function perfectly today. They are really a part of the, we're going to see one of them today as well. But going forward. Yeah, this is one thing I wanted to just to show you, that they also started, to take seriously these regulations, and they started, to bring buildings with new functions kind of in the scale and in the context of the city, which was not the case. You see the angle of the nine-story building over there. It was a modernist block, like standing randomly in the city, and they started, to work with the mistakes of the past. But the important thing is this project. So this was the last part of this construction of history, which was built until 1989, I think. And this is the project where architects actually started to really go into preservation space. So the project consisted of reconstructing the 3 blocks over, but there was a lot of urban structure left from previous epochs. And on this screen, you can see they made the sketches of the old streets, how they looked before the reconstruction started. And they made this plan with 2 versions, trying to work with the old structure. So the white buildings are the new parts, and the darker ones are the old ones. And the important thing that they even tried to, in the first version, they tried to work with the old street pattern. So the Podil, before it got burned in 19th century, it was then redesigned, etc., etc. It had its old streets, and they wanted to accentuate the history in the place. They wanted to kind of give a feel that this is something different than new development. This is something that connects to the past, and they had these connections with the line of the streets, and also, of course, with the scale, because this is 3 to 4, I think 3 to 5 story buildings, and all of them are part of this urban block. So they tried to save as much buildings as they could, but it was not impossible often because of their poor conditions of the structure. This is one of the sketches of this somehow. Here you can see only the new buildings, but it had to be encompassed also by older ones. So kind of inserting in this old structure the new courtyards and new space. We're gonna see how it looks. It looks a bit different, but still has this feeling. And they also kind of contrasted it and joined it with the colors and the forms and the situation plan of the old environment. So that this is the view from the church. This is architects themselves. They wanted it kind of to have this context of the also attachment to the church, and you see that they're trying somehow to work with it. And on this part, this is old Podil loggias, which were built by the people themselves back in 19th century. And they try to kind of catch it, to catch the spirit, to look at it, and maybe to conceptualize the building with this wooden balconies. And this is also a nice photo, which is a bit dramatic. It's Viktor Marushenko, one of the greatest Ukrainian photographers. He is unfortunately no longer with us, but he captured the architect and the buildings. Specifically, I don't know why, but this image is a bit tilted. I think it's specific. I hope it's specific because it also kind of brings a bit of discussion in this old Soviet, kind of linearity and synthesization. So, there is somehow this discussion of you're the author, but you don't have, all of the things that author should have. The praise from people and the commemoration and all of the things. So you're still some kind of a man behind the scenes, some kind of a person who is not getting the real attention and this, and also the system. It was a bit shaking. But coming to the last part, which is a project we're going to talk more about today, is the one which happened. So we walked around this part, these 3 blocks, and then we're going to walk here, and here is the real postmodernism. I'm joking, but yeah. I like this photo because it feels like a Corbusier over the Plan de Voisin hand. This is the hand of Yuri Shalatsky, who was the chief architect of the project. And then this is actually not his building even, which is funny, but he was overlooking the whole area. And you see, this is something very different, something looking very different and also feeling very different. So this project started at the same time as DOT, but got built much later in the end. So it got very many stages. And at first it was, more or less like a, Soviet upgraded housing, typified, untypified, combined these sections, etc., etc. But since it took so long to build, they made a lot of progress. So in my opinion, this time of thinking gave them an opportunity to build much, much better than they would if they developed the first version. So yeah, I'm gonna just hang on for a minute on this photo. So this building was the last to be built in 1993, already by a private developer. You're gonna see it today. And this is some kind of the end swan song of the Soviet time, which was kind of the last, for me, personally, like this feeling of the building that was already un-Soviet, but Soviet, and it hangs on the epochs. And this bridge, which is complete postmodernism. I mean, it doesn't have any functional reason to exist, anything to support, anything to, I don't know, to give some kind of orientation. It's just a thing that you will see kind of it develops the structure into a more meaningful area. And there are a few things that for me are important to know before we go there, and to know how they looked at this postmodernism. So they started to think about histories, how each block could develop as a place with a meaning, not just an area for being, but they tried to insert in every single courtyard. They tried to insert some kind of story, invented or reinvented or brought back. So in one place there was this is a good story. The elephant from the Elephant de Bastille. They wanted to reenact this small event of children having safe place under the elephant, just as a clue, as a small ironic idea of bringing this courtyard with this Italian piazza together, also bringing back, like giving a link to literature, referencing things from beyond the urban area. They had also sun clock, for instance. They made a sun clock at the entrance to the kindergarten as a waiting area, so that people could, in the daytime, they could also wait and look at the sun clock going around the place. And at the same time, for instance, here they made a propylea. We'll see it's no longer there to make kind of a propylea passway through the blocks on the place of the old 16th century street. So it was never intended to be written anywhere. It was just for in the thought of the person who's going there, for the feeling that you are kind of passing through the layers of history. And yeah, so we're gonna see also the gazebo, the altanka thing, which is the center of another courtyard there. And you see the variety here, and the quality of each of the facades has grown much more compared to the first version. So they invested time they had before it's gonna be built into trying to make it more specific, more individual. And actually, each of this building has their own architect. So there was a team, but each of the building has a name of the architect in the planning documentation. Yeah, this is the gazebo. We're not going to see it because it got half demolished. And this was the center of one of the courtyards, and it started to fall apart. And the communal enterprise wanted to demolish it, but the process got stopped by active citizens and Borys as well. So each courtyard, so for instance, this was a ship. Ship was intended to give back links to the Dnieper River, which is 500 meters or 400 meters from the blocks. And this ship was intended also as a functional space, not only just as a symbol of something, which was, behind it was the entrance to the kindergarten, so kids could run out of the kindergarten to this ship and run around. this was all kind of linked together by this visual access. So they tried to make the story not only as a story of each courtyard, but also a long story, as something like a epopeia of different angles, views, stories, etc., where you could, or a postmodern collage, you would say, something you could see from different sides and look from different perspectives, and then get in and actually see it from the. So this is one of the places we're going to see today, which was intended to have the elephant at the end, but it's not there as well. So the cover they used, it was based on the idea of the 19th century, late 19th century, early 20th century facades in Kyiv, which were painted over brick to minimize the cost, so not to plaster it, but just to paint over. It was more, so you see the old original buildings that were actually had this color, and they wanted to extend this cover to whole structure. So they found out how to do it with the palette they took from their colleagues who went to France and brought them the palette, how to combine the colors based on the sun, based on the standing north, south, etc. And these things actually work because this is the first solution. And I don't know why it didn't get the whole scale. So this is the later solution. So they painted all of the blocks. None of them was left freestanding. And one of the things that is important that I think the structure is so differentiated that it even doesn't suffer from this upgrade by people. So it's already that much out of modernism, which got its standardization, typification, and straight lines and white places, that somehow this human interaction with this facade actually does not harm it that much. And not only with the facades, but with the space itself. You will see it how we go. And I got this feeling that these colors, when they get old, they really bring the structure as it always stood there. One of the things that we won't see, which was also an important thing, an innovation in Soviet economy, which is the super small scale cafe, which was not possible in the late Soviet, even in the 80s, in the late 80s possibly, but it was a solution from the general plan of the city to build this one cafe, economically unsuitable for the city, just to make this happen. And when it got privatized, it got rebuilt immediately because nobody got a feeling of how to use this small space economically viable way. It's just an architect's invention or a small architect's invention. But it was intended to be that small because, of course, why would you build this small? Because you can see on the previous picture that the buildings around are also small. So they wanted to kind of highlight this difference of scales. And this is the propylaea we're going to walk today, which has still this standing wall there, which is no longer there, and you can still see somehow this pathway, which is today no longer visible. One of the last things before we're going to jump to the kind of after postmodernism part is that they used every space, they tried to use every space in the district. And this is also a functional space. We're gonna see how it worked in a bit in different image, but you see that it is accentuated as not as the bowling facility or as something, but as a meaningful area to spend time at. And I just want to try to zoom in on a block to see how it functioned, not in a very Soviet way, I would say. First of all, it of course was kind of rupturing all its connections with typification as much as possible, so it's no longer visible that basically the quality of materials is bad, but it's no longer visible that this is a Soviet building itself. So they tried to jump over all of these regulations and to bend them as much as possible to get this built. And they managed. So each of the blocks was built by a different organization or a design, not a design institute, but a different plant or factory or something they wanted their housing for the workers. And each of the blocks had their own kind of situation plan, of course, and I wanted to focus on this upper part as much as possible because this was a vista, a pedestrian vista going to the metro over there in the park, and the block was kind of a bit situated back from this pathway. it's not that visible on the plan, but every living room has its windows in the block. So because of the tram, they managed to situate every building that has a living room or. So the kitchens and living rooms face the street, but the bedroom faces the courtyard. Because of the tram and because of the traffic, they wanted to make them as much comfortable as it was possible by that time. And it is in the process of like later stages of development, but you see they built a lot of different communal spaces. For instance, these areas which were intended for, I don't know, just maybe free time spending for some reason. It's hard to find a specific one, but this unspecificness is also maybe a sign of the idea. And this block, having all the differentiated areas, has in this passway, the outer passway, so the roads on both sides. It was kind of this thing inherited, which I told you from the first structure of the back of Horkovo-Bazhenko, of these half-permeable areas, which are enclosed but still accessible and feel both as a home and as a place to be, to feel maybe a stranger a bit. And this idea of new commons, so these are the two of the 6 architects of the project, so Yuri Shalatsky and Georgy Dukhovichny, and we were working with them through this area. And these new commons, for me, are kind of having their highest stage at this project. So this was this ultra space which had no meaning but just a boiler facility with a roof. But they found a way how to use the venting shafts, so the venting parts, as the roof with the sunscreen. And this sunscreen created a whole different atmosphere. It was no longer this Soviet standardized space, but something where you could just go, maybe have a coffee, maybe make a picnic, maybe go with your kids, maybe something else. It has, of course, not only just one exit, but it had to have one entrance, one exit, and the other one. So it has 3 exits, being this space for maybe and also everyday use. And this place, which was laid in the famous Kyivan clinker brick, which is basically undestroyable by itself, which is a sign of this epoch of the 80s. It was a theater place, so they wanted to make this common theater. They even tried to negotiate with the Podil theater, maybe to have the summer stage there. It never happened, and we're going to see what happened to it today, but the quality of the each of the square meter of this project has gotten definitely better with the time they spent working on it. And just before we jump to the thing, I wanted to maybe this thing somehow a bit got lost. But the idea I wanted to show that this heterarchy, which developed and allowed for this project, is very important, because previously, of course, the city council was the chief client of every project in the city. It was kind of had this plan. The plan got to Kyiv Project or other institutes, and then it got designed and built. But in perestroika time, they started to negotiate directly with the clients who were going to have this. So these are different clients who wanted to have these things built. They could be factories, institutes, etc., that got specific direct orders, and they could work basically just filing in a report or filing in an agreement with the city council or with the general plan. So they were no longer restricted completely by the city or by the state or by the ideology, because first they had their own account, which was very important. They started to have their own account. They could get funds on, and they could kind of have these agreements with the specific construction companies. And a lot of projects which are much more interesting were built by the materials of these companies or by the hands of these people of these companies, not by the city anymore. And this thing actually held on into 90s and then dissolved into market conditions where the city were no longer a client that much, and this structure overtook this logic of direct client company design institute connection, overtook the logic of the Soviet time. And just jumping over to the last part before I give word to Borys, is the last project we're not going to go today because it's just a bit too long, and it's funny because it's hard to get there by public transport. But we're going to have a discussion with the architect today, so I just wanted to highlight as much as possible. So the idea is that it's just over Podil. It's just 10 minutes from Podil, 5 minutes from Podil. And they wanted to replicate or to rethink this contemporary development in the way it was. I mean, yes, of course, we can think of a more complicated structure like this one, yeah, like being specifically designed, but on the level of plan, they tried to replicate the blocks to go beyond this classical freestanding structures as well, and maybe again. And they actually had a chance. It's under construction, this part. So trying to work with this historical narrative of what's the quality of a human life in the city, having a street, having a place to be, having a well-designed architectural areas, having a street facade, not just random buildings freestanding, maybe, which could work for this new Kyiv, or maybe the Kyiv is yet to come. And can we just, можна включити перше посилання, потім друге?
Can you please display the first link and then the second one?
The Podil is there. Completely closed courtyards. And this is accessible public areas between the blocks. You see the highway, and there would be a small. Можно назад на презентацию? And there would be a small private. It's a small. I think maybe it's. Можно назад на презентацию? A small private school there as well built. So, but the communal facilities are designed in a very, very different way compared to what we could expect from 80s or 70s. So these are some highlights because, yeah, I just wanted to accentuate that the street scale or the block structure, they kind of accentuated in the 2015 that we are building design based on the ideas of the good city and of Podil. So the Podil was kind of highlighted as the good case of the city, and which the people wanted to maybe not replicate, but to rethink of, to replicate. So the Podil was thought as a, yeah, as a model for the future development, maybe from today on. And at this point, yeah, I just want to say not the end. And is the presentation ready? Yes. So just come. There? Okay, but just should they switch the model? So the thing is, going back to the very start of the thing, we wanted to show our work that we did here. How we try to rethink it with the computer technology, and how we're trying to make it accessible for general public, not only for experts, and we're gonna make a website with the description of the qualities of this space. I think it's now. It's now. Yes, it's a time for questions before you're ready anyway. Okay, but we're gonna see it on the excursion, but I just wanted to highlight when the ideas got actually, publicly, discursively accentuated. Somehow this project got into public attention going on that we had these old structures and we want to work with them as some kind of a model or an idea, because with the other things or the other projects happening, I never found any, I would say not theoretical, but description basis that I could develop the presentation on. But of course there were things happening, and we will see most of them are this kitschy postmodern thing we often expect from postmodernism. If you want.
Because we know the 90s and 2000s as the more extreme version of postmodernism, and that was kind of a development built on the 80s. That's why how this postmodernism got sort of developed in this specific context.
Yeah, this is a very interesting thing. I think this is a challenge for our next research project, and also for maybe not only our research project, but I think the architecture of 90s and 2000s and built environment of this area is not really considered something worth researching. Was maybe even heritage, some things, but of course there were valuable things happening, and in a sense most of the projects for us maybe look weird and yeah, incomprehensibly in their quality or something, but this gap, which is why it's here, is because, for instance, with the discussion we're going to have today, it's really felt that this area, this time did not exist.
Because you could say it a bit differently, namely that the people who were working on the early postmodernism, this was a young generation of architects, as I understand it. And so those architects are, some of them, still practicing today, right? So they must have done something in those past 20 years, 30.
Yeah, we're gonna, no, not today, but we're gonna, today when the recursion, we're gonna see the things a bit of the further projects of them, but of course there is a lot of things, and also by them, but just beyond the scope of this discussion. Yeah, if you have any questions, comments, anything, you can join.
Yeah, have another one?
Yeah.
About one of the last schemes that she showed us about the order of design, the hierarchy.
Later?
No, the latest one with the text only. With arrows.
Ah, okay, I got it. Yeah.
The previous one. This one. So you said that it was a very normal thing that the city council was the only responsible client, but this could be a local Kyiv context, because it did happen in the largest cities of the Soviet Union that the local power was more powerful. The smaller the city got, the more powerful were the industries and the military. We just discussed it in the case of Lviv, for instance. And well, the later we go in the Soviet Union, the more powerful the councils became. Mm-hmm. This, you say, is a very much a council project.
Yeah, so I was just trying to sketch it. It's maybe not 100% precise, just a sketch of the logic that was followed in Kyiv before, that to contrast it with this thing that allowed for this project to happen later. It's maybe not about all of the Ukraine as such. It's maybe more about the Kyiv case. In Kyiv, the council was strong. Not the council, but the so the Vykonkom is not a council. It's just the chief. Well, how they call it?
Executive committee.
Yeah, executive committee was strong. Yes.
No, but because that was also the case in I think in Leningrad was the city where the council was, the executive committee was the strongest one. But in smaller cities, this was truly a competition between the local power and state level powers distributed through ministries.
Yeah. Thank you. Should you just give the...
Hi, thank you for this incredibly interesting presentation. I mean, I'm still
You can put it off for a second.
I still think I try to get my head around the different, you know, aspects that that influence these projects. Well, my question is also related to the structure of decision making in the late 1980s, because you very convincingly pointed out to which extent this was a project that combined, well, basically something between between socialism and capitalism, where these old structures of centralized state planning gradually gave way to new forms of planning and financing. So my main question, without, I mean, I know that this is a complicated structure and you cannot really summarize it in 3 sentences, but to which extent was this 1986 project by Rybalsky built by funds that do not derive from state sources? Meaning not only, you know, factories, obviously, who were clients, but was there any influx from, you know, private funds of the people who would later inhabit these flats, or how was this funding structure?
You can ask this question of the Volodymyr Shevchenko, who's going to be here, I hope very much. He's gonna be with us today. He was the chief of the planning department, of the architectural department in the institute. He was the head of this team, so he could elaborate maybe a bit more on this post-socialist economic relations, intra-socialist economic relations. But what I know for 100% that this building and in the one on the other side were already private projects in 1990. They were privately funded by non-state funds, and they got built in the end by private entities. But all of the others were money of the factories and of the workers of the factories. I don't know if they bought the flats or they invested via some cash desk at the factory, or the factory. I don't know. No, not specifically that. I think if you're gonna just share.
There was a continuous problem with the housing stock in the Soviet Union, obviously, and in the mid-80s, Gorbachev tried to rebalance it by introducing new forms of housing, and the cooperatives really lagged behind. The idea to start them, to make them more prominent in the cities, it just didn't work out. And in the 80s, Gorbachev tried to increase the share of cooperatives as well, and then other more private types of apartments. So it's really interesting to see how this housing stock balance in this specific place worked.
I know another funny story, just a short one. There was a kind of a competition, but a choice of which construction company got which building, and one of those got the one which the most complicated facade, because they could not, the others could not lay the bricks and the concrete structure over it and everything together in the way the architects intended. So the others just said, no, we're not going to build, and there is only one construction company that actually took on this project.
Yeah, thank you for this incredible story. Actually, my question would be also to the processes that happen in parallel to the one that you described us. Actually, those projects are projects of rather mesoscale or microscale, because at the same time, the whole left bank story in Kyiv took place. So actually what we have this attempts to step back from this modernist large-scale planning, but we also have these huge projects happening at the same time. So I'm wondering, is this a story of a specific group of people who found the space for them to express differently, or it was rather a general trend? Because on the larger scale, you have this huge modernist projects continuing during the 80s, the 90s, and all Kharkivska and Pozняki and Osokorki also were planned rather in the same time.
Yeah, I just wanted to make this outlook. The whole plan is, I think, maybe 5% of the city, maybe 3%, not more, and the whole area. I mean, and the scale of the city is this one. So you see, the city in 1980s was planning to develop, it actually got developed, the Troyeshina and Pozniki areas. And this is this thing I think Dmitry was accentuating, what happened basically in parallel. And I think this project did not get as much attention or as much what was the reflection on what's the principles and what the qualities are and why should we think of this way further, because Kyiv somehow, of course, got this distinction of what's historical city and not, and everything in the historical city is one thought and everything outside is another way of the building, development, etc. And if you go to Pozniki and if you look at the map of Pozniki, contemporary map, it looks like a Soviet map, but it was built in 2000s. So you wouldn't really make a difference not seeing the buildings themselves. And this is for me a case for us and for the architectural society and for the planners not having this reflection going deep enough or going around of this development issues. Because this continues up to this day. So I mean the quality of the space, except for the Rybalsky, and not because I want to promote it or something, because it was the first project where I heard of this idea being kind of brought to front. Why do we do it differently than usual? And yeah, Pozniki actually got a very different story. So I think we're gonna wrap up, and I want to give word to Borys. Borys, do you need the mic? You have a mic. I hope it won't scream, like, you know.
Thank you. In our practice as understanding Soviet Podil, we don't hesitate to use different mediums, sometimes at one time, sometimes experimenting and searching for some new ways of representation.
Can you speak louder or bring the mic closer to the mouse?
Yep. And now it's kind of supporting research about the medium. When we show the buildings as digital models and show it accompanied with some theory, with pictures, and we're looking for benefits that we can get from this approach. We chose 5 locations with built and mostly unbuilt buildings, projects, and model them, preparing them for augmented reality. And the first one is Antonovich that was mentioned by Sasha. From urban scale, we took the scale of in between. It's larger than one building, but less than the district. And it's just one of the blocks where we can see how its components work together.
Can you for a second just stop? I wanted to show you this modernist part. You can have this feeling of how this building is still distanced from the street scale, from the street level. You actually have to go to an entrance to it. You cannot access it directly. And this is this freestanding structure, just an open space, behind which was the cafe, I think, or some kind of post office, which was the only function there they could possibly position there. Was no kind of cultural entertainment, anything, offices, etc. It was really like still a housing issue, not the thing, like the contrasted with the thing they developed in the late 80s, which was already a living part, where the cafes, shops, and other places where I could just get around the area.
Yeah, and now I'd like to mention some benefits that this way of playing with or researching the model that can give. For example, you can jump from the scale of a car driver, which is important for this project, to the human scale, and see how it feels. The 3D model, I think, gives some spatial experience, and you can quickly swap between for example, the top view, then to see like inhabitant does. And
can you zoom to the gazebo?
Yeah.
The gazebo in the center. Yeah, this was.
Yeah, you can quickly
this
swap
small postmodern, just a pinch, just something they threw in the project. It is unscalable compared to the building, but still something that gives a different feel in the place. There are a few of them scattered around. It was cheap to do because this is just bricks and metal, but still something that gives a feeling of the courtyard. And you see the entrance is on the one level, and then you go up, and then you can go even more further, so this you can enter and exit around the structure. And I think it's quite convenient because each of the building has entrances to both sides. You can go to the courtyard or you can go to the street, depending on how you feel today, where you want to go. Are you with the kids, with the guests? I don't know.
Yeah, interesting thing is this feel of intimacy of the yard. It's open, but still you feel protected inside.
Yeah, and because the building is just on one side, you don't feel this overhanging of structures on your head that you are trapped in somewhere, because the other side is much wider and there is space around. So it's this density, the kind of high density, which is much more manageable than often as constructed today, because you have still open space enough to get on a relevant distance to the building.
And in real life, lots of people, they really look like the guys who live there. They stand near this.
It's parked all over parked. We think we need to add cars there because it's parked all over.
Coffee or beer and look really happy. The other thing is how the building is put into context of the older buildings. You see the borders of the block and the building that we're discussing.
Yeah, so it kind of opens up an entrance from this side, but covers it from the central, the bigger road, the highway. It covers the courtyard, and the kindergarten is open. This space is open, so people from the buildings, they don't get the feeling that it's kind of enclosed area. But this is also a part of the courtyard, basically, and you can see your kids there, and etc. And the best way is that we're accessible to your house, because if you, for instance, live in this building, it's of course logical to go through this building there. So just use the stairs. So it just develops the district, giving more passages, giving more space, and unfortunately at this point not giving much more function. But this was also a part of the issue with the economy as well.
These are some technical buildings that are partly under the ground, and you don't see them, then they don't disturb you. and kindergarten.
Yeah, they used landscaping for every kindergarten, so they are all on different levels, at least 3. So because of the kids are small, you can play more with the scales, even in the height of one block. Yes, they had one solution. In the plan I showed before, that the part near the railway was to be built as a large 3- or 4-story parking building. So there was like 3 entrances to it, and it was like a large, long structure where the cars should be stored. And in each interview I read with the architects, they highlighted that this thing is not getting built. We're kind of curious when it's going to be built, or who's going to order the construction of this thing, when. Yes. So this was that. But can you stop for a second, maybe? Just back one hinge back, maybe. So this place was a technical area where you could just there was for the solutions with the waste and the technical issues with the heating and electricity. They were all in one place, just to minimize the use of space and to function as also an open ground. So you could put benches there, something like, you know, spend free time. But it was for the big block, one thing, combining all of the services.
And the beautiful thing is how sculptural the facade is, and when you model this thing, you feel the connections with the method of planning, and if you have some thoughts about how will it work, because I'd like to mention that one of the purposes that we got is
can you speak
oriented on the people who are not architects, who are far from architecture, and we'd like them to understand some principles, some qualities, what's good in contemporary architecture, what's not. And I think it's the thing that they have to feel, not to educate, because it's not their discipline, but some understanding what's good or what's bad, and the connections between the solutions of the project and how it feels in real life. We suppose that the way of showing as 3D infographics or some sculptures to play with may help for this purpose. If you have some feedback, I'd like to hear, because it's work in progress, and
it's a very silly one. You say you're trying to show this model to people who are not in architecture, and the trees are really small. This is, I think, kind of a misleading thing. In reality, they're going to be like thrice as big. They are, obviously, isn't it?
I'll check, maybe.
No, because you're talking about scale and scale from the street side, more for car drivers, and inside. That even for me, I've been working with 3D models for many years, well, these buildings, because of the trees, look much bigger than they really are, I think.
Thank you.
I just have one small question, just referring to the questions before. I think it's a very interesting project, and my question is, how specific is this site regarding all the context of Kyiv? And I mean, like you told that it's like 3% of Kyiv, and how is it a special project? I mean, in all the context, or is it a common thing to invest a lot of, to invest a lot of effort and money and thought into like one urban block? Could you just, mention the context a little bit?
I can answer that it was specific project with high hopes. It had to become one of the main streets in Kyiv, and representative.
Yeah, definitely. The thing is, can you show us from the from a bit far from the road or somewhere where you can see the whole complex, like from the like, yeah, okay, but like this is just skip. So this street was the street on the other side, the other block was the continuation of Kreshatik. You know, Kreshatik is this main avenue, like the key street in the city, and it was kind of going on, and then they started to think of, we are doing wrong things with building all these 9-story typified things. We have to find a solution, and this was one of the solutions that could answer this question of how the city could develop, you know, in a kind of beautiful way, but still in a modern way. So building based on all the more modern ideas of the Soviet architecture, how they could find a solution for this large area, not just to replicate something or to build these typified, standardized 9-story buildings. And this was this middle ground, maybe, you know, in a sense, but also some kind of a very sculptural area which could show you that Soviet architecture evolved, that it's not longer just following the old traditions, but it's something to say, has something to say to the world. And when you pass to the Lipetska Square, you could see the difference, the evolution, the new concepts of architecture and planning as well there. Okay. Then it's time to finish the first part. I'd like you all to start taking things with you and moving towards the exit where we'll start the excursion. If you want to grab tea or coffee, we have like 5-7 minutes, go to the toilet, etc. It's just time for us to move on. And I'm glad, and thank you, Borys, very much for the presentation, for the model, Oksana and Eglė for the introduction, and the museum staff and our translators for this part. We're gonna be back with the events here at 3 or at 3:30, depending on how fast we make it with the excursion. And to all of our online listeners, thank you for being with us, and hope to see you today and tomorrow. Thank you.